right, Claudio, thank you very much for joining me for this Coffee with the Editor series. You are the head of cooperation at the EU Delegation to Zambia and COMESA. That's quite a mouthful. Thank you for joining me. So you've got quite an extensive experience across various sectors, water, sanitation, transport, and energy. What do you think are the key challenges, you've encountered in these areas within Zambia and COMESA, and why does it make it relevant for your participation at the Land-Linked Zambia event?
Thanks for inviting me. Communication and transportation and energy are really the main subjects of our interventions at regional level in Southern Africa region, but in general for the whole continent, especially for what concerns transportation. We are fully aware that there is no possible development of economies without having a strong connectivity between countries. So the European Union was created as a group of countries, and the first really actions to strengthen that link between the different European Union countries was on infrastructure of transport. So taking stock of this experience, obviously we are very much convinced that it's one of the main aspects that needs to be solved especially in Zambia as a land-linked country. The question of how to relate with the neighbors country is fundamental for the economic activities that are developed in Zambia. They all especially related to mining operations. Without a strong transport network, it's something that otherwise will be always limited.
So bringing it back to the organization you represent, what are the main objectives of the EU Global Gateway framework, and how does it aim to transform infrastructure development in Zambia and the broader COMESA region, specifically regarding, transport, that interregional trade, which you just touched on, and in more relevant to me, the railway sector?
This interest in interconnecting countries, and actually it's not only countries, because when the African continent relates then to other continents, Asia or America, North and South America, then transport is also fundamental in terms of maritime transportation. But let's say that this interest in connecting economic realities is one of the main aspects of the Global Gateway Initiative, which is now what frames basically all activities under the European Union and partner countries relations, and not only in Africa, but also globally. And this Global Gateway basically means that the connectivity is fundamental. Connectivity means not only transport, but connectivity in terms of electricity, so transmission lines and production of electricity, but it means also digitalization, how to connect countries in digital, and in water, so not only sea water, but also sweet water, let's say river communication, lake communication, etc. So the Global Gateway is really the response to this need in terms of intercommunication. The global, let's say, the global setting needs to have interconnectivity. And again, for Zambia, the question of the development of the railways is fundamental. We've been discussing with the government since already a bit about the different options that needs to be put in place to strengthen the railway sector, because especially in relation to the targets of the government in terms of mining operations, in terms of the development of the agriculture sector, those targets are very well perceived in terms of private sector development, etc., but they are just a theoretical scope if you don't have the direct connection with the transport. And when you talk about mining operations, it is without saying that the railway sector is involved. So you cannot foresee a mining exploitation thinking that you will bring the minerals or the transformed products after the extraction by truck. That is simply not working, has never worked anywhere in the world. The mining operations are linked completely to the railway development. And so this is why there are different, let's say, discussion with the government in Zambia at present. The most important one, which is one of the biggest investment where the European Union, together with some other stakeholders like the US government, are working in, is that the Lobito Corridor railway line that will be, let's say, targeting the northern part of the country, connecting to the Lobito port in Angola. That is exactly to respond to this huge need of transportation of minerals, but not only minerals, because the mineral, let's say, world need a different kind of also transport of other goods, of other products. So railway is fundamental for the development of Zambia. It's not only the Lobito Corridor. Zambia has an existing railway line. Its name is Zambia Railways, that needs deep rehabilitation because as it is, it's not really responding to the needs in terms of railway transport. As a consequence, most of the traffic that could use the railway network goes on roads, with consequences in terms of maintenance, etc., of the road network. So let's say that our discussion with the government are very much focusing on railways in this moment, and the government has correctly so different operations in mind, how to connect the existing and future railways in Zambia to existing or future railways in the region, like in Walvis, a railway line with Angola, the railway connection with Durban, or with Beira in Mozambique, or the future rehabilitation of Tazara that connects to the port in Dar es Salaam.
Are they making progress with this? Because I know the EU has put forward a couple of ideas and proposed financing frameworks for the improvement of Zambia's railways, and so have the Chinese and a few others. Is the decision-making process actually happening, or is it just taking a bit of time to get to a resolution?
The urgency is definitely there, but there is urgencies that are urgent and urgencies that will materialize in a medium term. So, for instance, the government is willing to multiply by 3 copper production from here to 2031. Obviously, that production in 2031 will be impossible without providing transport means like either Lobito Corridor or the rehabilitation of Zambia Railways and Tazara. But the government also has other, let's say, priorities, because there are linked to the transport sector. There are also, and the energy sector that goes hand in hand with the transport sector and the mining sector. So there are urgencies that, for instance, have to be solved in terms of immediate action on Zambia Railways, for instance. Zambia Railways needs urgent, let's say, increase operational ability, so they cannot stay at the level they are now. They need to have some urgent measures to also to place Zambia Railways in a situation where private investors will be able to step in, for instance.
Because I think there's a bigger role from a funding and we're going to get to what you have to say now about it. But I believe that there's a bigger role from a financing perspective that the private sector can contribute. So, you know, we've got this big resource from a mining perspective. They should be contributing to, you know, the largest aspect of what makes them money, and that's getting it, you know, to the port. So I think there is a big need for a broader discussion around how private sector, specifically mining, can get involved in funding improved railway operations, which is, you know, fundamental for what they need. Your main topic at the upcoming Land-Linked event, you're going to be talking about available financing operations under the European Union. What can participants look forward to? I also want to know about the climate, you know, access to climate funding, green funding, the credits around that, particularly for transport projects, with emphasis on opportunities within the rail sector.
It needs to be clear that we have bilateral discussions and agreements with the government, and normally these are transformed in terms of grant agreements with the government to develop whatever kind of program in any sectors. Now, it is clear that when we arrive to a discussion on big investments linked to railways or roads or whatever, we are talking about amounts that are not the same amounts that we are normally providing to the government in terms of grants that can cover the cost of an infrastructure development. Obviously, those are amounts that can trigger the participation to the financing of an investment program with other entities. Now, whether in the past the European Union has been working a lot in the infrastructure development, especially with the financial development institution like the European Investment Bank, etc., it comes more and more. It happens more and more that there is also the involvement of the private sector in project development. Now, for instance, for the specific, let's say, the context in Zambia, with the problem of the debt restructuring, the lack of possibilities for the government to access the international market, etc. This option of having the private sector intervening as a stakeholder in the development of infrastructure projects becomes extremely interested and needed. So the direct participation of the private sector. Obviously, we can accompany that process with financing coming partly from, let's say, development cooperation funds. So, for instance, the envelope that we agreed with the government in our bilateral relationship, but it's money that can come also from regional funds and reserves, because especially for what we are discussing today in terms of railway networks, those are considered fully as regional projects. But then there are also options in terms of accessing funds from financial institutions. So the European Investment Bank is one of those institutions where the railway networks are within the priority areas in terms of transport, because of, for instance, in terms of climate change, they are responding much more to the needs of lowering the gas emissions, etc. So they are much more efficient from a climate change perspective. So that is definitely something that we are now targeting, how to involve the private sector in terms of a concessional agreement or PPPs, etc., how to let them step in the sector, but assuring the private sector that they are backed by either the European Commission or the European Union as a whole, together with the European financial institutions. There is also the option for the private sector to access financial guarantees. So, well, financial guarantees that are offered to the banking system to assure them that a certain investment is guaranteed by us. So that is another possibility for the private sector to step in. There are different architectures. It's not a one solution fit all. So it depends on the kind of investment needed, if it's a rehabilitation, a brand new infrastructure, or just a specific punctual intervention. Then there are different options that are offered to the government and to the private sector to have that particular scheme accompanied. For instance, we've been discussing with the government about Zambia Railways, what the government wants in the future for Zambia Railways. This is something that will then trigger discussions on how to better intervene. For instance, in Lobito Corridor, there are negotiations ongoing to understand how that specific new railway line will be managed. And that triggers, obviously, then the financing that needs to accompany that scheme.
So one of my questions that I have around financing, and obviously this impacts the European environment, especially in terms of climate change. You know, many of the projects in Africa, the railway line is servicing the mining sector, as we have discussed already. And that also comes down to servicing mines who are coal mining. And I seem to be reading between the lines that, you know, coal is not so attractive anymore from a financing perspective, certainly from a climate change perspective. But, you know, the rest of the world, we still have the resource. We are mining the resource. We need the railway to move the resource. And there is still a demand for it. And that demand is not going to go away tomorrow. There will be a continued demand for it. How are you adapting that when coal is part of the commodity that is going to be run on that line?
Very tricky question. It's indeed it's difficult for me to reply to this, because it is definitely true that within the climate objectives and targets, any activity that is promoting the use of fossil fuels goes against this, let's say, the needs of investing in traditional energy, let's say, productions. So you are asking whether a train that is transporting coal goes either towards the objective of reducing gas emissions, because we are not using trucks but the train. But if the train is bringing coal, then how the two things can coexist?
That's pretty much it.
It is difficult. I don't have an exact reply, especially because while when you are discussing a transmission line, you know more or less from where the electricity is coming from a dam.
Precisely.
The train, you will never know whether the train will transport coal or maize or soya beans or whatever. So I would not say that it is clear that whenever you are establishing a rehabilitation project or a brand new construction project, you have to have an economic assessment that obviously takes into consideration the goods that will be transported. And in there, clearly, whenever the new railway line is serving only the transport of coal, that would immediately have let's say, a second thought from our point of view. If we are talking about a railway line, for instance, like Zambia Railways, that in the moment it will be up to standards, will transport every kind of goods that are needed for the country, from petrol to food commodities or cement or fertilizers. Then it's a bit difficult to say not transport coal because it's not. So I don't know if I've answered to your question, but I would say that if we would be asked to finance a railway line that from a coal mine goes to a coal power station to be used to produce electricity, that railway line most probably will not receive our agreement.
Okay. Well, it's good to clarify. So,
Sure.
so that my audience knows how to structure their deals going forward.
Absolutely.
What are your overall views and thoughts on transport infrastructure, the opportunities in Africa, and why Zambia is best positioned as a regional trade hub?
This is my fifth country where I've worked in Africa. And I must say it's the fourth country where I've been dealing with railways.
Okay.
So I have a certain experience in the sector, and it's a very interesting sector. And as I was mentioning before, Zambia as a country cannot fulfill its objectives in terms of development, economic development, without the railway system. It's really, it needs to be it is clear with the government. They are fully aware that, and they have also legislate on that. 30% of the goods normally should be transported on rails. And therefore they cannot avoid that. Now, it must be clear that from a purely transport setting in Zambia, it will be needed I would not call it a revolution, but an adaptation to a new setting where goods will be transported on rails, at least on the main axis. So the transport sector, which is a very important sector in Zambia, I'm meaning the road transport, it will need to readapt together with the government in terms of refining its objectives and its place within the transport as a whole of goods and materials and commodities in Zambia, because clearly the railway sector is competing with the road sector. But in a future vision, when the country will come out from this economic and macroeconomic situation, and where the mining sector will be fully again operational, there will be place for every actor, not only the railway sector. There will be place for the road transport, because the railways are not going everywhere. So the transport sector will simply have to readapt and not negotiate, but refine its own role within the new setting of transport infrastructure in Zambia, where the railway sector will be very important again. Because it was, I mean, when first operations in the mining sector were happening in Zambia, the railway sector was fully operational. All goods were transported in there, in the railway line, and it was working. Now we are seeing a situation where, because of the railway line not working completely, all the goods are transported on roads. But this is not what should happen, actually.
I'm in total agreement there. And I think it's quite important that it is understood that rail is not necessarily competing with road. They are two parts of an ingredient of, let's call it a cake, and both or all are equally important. And in fact, if the rail sector was working at that level of delivery, then one could be assured that the trucking sector would actually be more busy than it's ever been from a first and last mile connectivity point of view. So I think on that note, I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person next week and hearing what you have to say.